Sorry. Okay, let's begin. In this video, I'm gonna talk about input in second language acquisition. So, input plays a very important role in second language acquisition. So, let's learn about it in this video. So, to begin with, what is input? So, input is sentences, words, and maybe any other linguistic materials that a language learner hears and sees. So, for example, if you're a baby and if you're still learning your first language or mother tongue, you hear sentences spoken by the members of your family. Your parents, your brother, your sister, and maybe your grandparents. So they speak language, and you hear sentences of that language. And that's input to you. Or if you are a learner of foreign language, of course you will hear sentences in that language spoken by your teacher, and you will read sentences or words on your textbook, and that's also input. Okay. And language acquisition is actually impossible without input. So, let's say this is isolated island, and only this baby lives on this island. Okay, and there is a plenty of food, and no animals attack the baby. And let's say animals actually help this baby grow up. In this kind of case, can the baby acquire language? No, of course not. It's just impossible to acquire language without input. So maybe this baby can live, but he cannot acquire language because he doesn't have input from anybody on this island. We can say the same thing about second language acquisition. So if you want to learn English as a second language, you need to have input in English. Without input in English, you cannot acquire English, of course not. But are all kinds of input helpful? Are all kinds of input helpful? Not really. So for example, Dutch children living in Holland, Dutch children, they cannot learn German by just watching a lot of German TV. And this was reported by some researchers. And next, hearing children of deaf parents. Okay, let's start with deaf parents. So deaf means that you cannot hear. So deaf parents, these are parents who cannot hear. So these parents don't speak. They can sign. So they can use a sign language, but they cannot use a spoken language because they cannot hear. So they don't speak, but they can have children who can hear. So hearing children. So these children's parents don't speak because they are deaf, because they can't hear. But these children themselves, they can hear. And according to these researchers, I don't know how to pronounce his or her name, Sak or I don't know, and others, according to them, these children cannot learn spoken language by just watching TV. So, of course, TV can give you a lot of input, but not all kinds of input are helpful for you to learn language. So, some kinds of input are helpful for language acquisition, while others are not. Okay. And we actually already know that for language acquisition to take place, input must be comprehensible to the learner. We call that kind of input comprehensible input. So the word comprehensible comes from the word comprehend. So comprehensible means that it can be comprehended. And to comprehend means to understand. So comprehensible means that it is understandable. It can be understood. And we cannot learn a new language by just watching TV, because most input we get from TV in that new language is not comprehensible to us. And the importance of comprehensible input was first pointed out by the researcher, very famous researcher called Krashen. And this is Krashen. And he talks about comprehensible input in this video. And he speaks English, but in this video, he also speaks German at 2 points. And I don't understand any German, so I have no idea what he's saying. But anyway, let's watch the first part where he speaks German.
And you can tell me which of these two very brief lessons you like better. Here's lesson number 1. Wir werden jetzt anfangen, Deutsch zu lernen. Und ich möchte im Voraus sagen, dass nach meiner Meinung Deutsch ist eine sehr schöne Sprache. Und ich hoffe, dass Sie alle sehr viel Erfolg mit Deutsch haben werden. What do you think? Good lesson so far?
Okay, he spoke German, and I have absolutely no idea what he said. Okay, but later he again speaks German, but this time a little differently. So let's watch that part.
Kopf. Das ist mein Kopf. Verstehen Sie Kopf? Ja? Gut. Kopf. And here I'll draw a picture now. Kopf. Ist gut, ja? Schön. Kopf. Das ist Mr. Spock, ja? Mr. Spock hat 2 Ohren. Ohren. Verstehen Sie Ohren? Er hat 2 Ohren. Okay, Mr. Spock. Ja? Ach, nein. Entschuldigung. Okay. Augen. Verstehen Sie Augen? Augen. Wie viele Augen? 1, 2, 3 Augen. 3 Augen. Ist das richtig? 3 Augen? Nein. Wir haben nur 2 Augen. Mund. Verstehen Sie Mund? Und hier ist eine Zigarette, ja? Nein. Zigaretten sind nicht gut. If you understood lesson number 2, Not every word.
Okay, I think, of course, we cannot understand all of what he said, but I think there should be some things that you could understand in what he said in German. So, for example, I think he said zwei. Excuse me for my pronunciation. Zwei. I think it meant two, and he also said Ohren. I think it means ear, and also he said dry. That should be three, and he also said nine. That should be no. So I have no prior knowledge of German, but from the way he spoke, I could guess the meanings of these words. And I think you could do the same thing just by watching and listening to this video. Okay? But I think you couldn't do the same thing for the first part where he spoke German, because he just spoke German without giving us any other information. But when he spoke German for the second time, he gave us other kinds of information. So, and that information made it possible for us to understand or comprehend what he was trying to say. Okay, so input must be comprehensible for language acquisition or second language acquisition to take place. But is any comprehensible input helpful for second language acquisition? The answer is actually no. So input must be comprehensible, of course, but there is another condition for input to become helpful. So input that is comprehensible but does not contain any new item to us, does not help us acquire any new item. Well, this is very obvious, I think. So if our interlanguage develops in this direction, and if our current stage is here, we need to get input, comprehensible input, that is at a bit higher stage. So if our current stage is I, we need to have comprehensible input at I plus 1 stage. Okay? So we need input that is at a bit higher stage than our current stage. But if we keep getting comprehensible input at a very low stage and a lot lower than our current stage, so let's say I minus 3 stage, our interlanguage does not develop, does not grow, because input at this stage does not contain any new item to us. So to acquire something new, input must contain that new thing. So for language acquisition or for second language acquisition to take place, we need input that is comprehensible and also at I plus 1 stage. So for the acquisition of new items in a second language to take place, input that is both comprehensible and I+1 must be available to the learner. Okay, so we need comprehensible input at this stage. That is a bit higher than our current stage, that is I+1 stage. Okay, so this is the essence of the input hypothesis proposed by Krashen. So he says we acquire only when we understand. Okay, understand, to understand means the same thing as to comprehend. Only when we understand language that contains a structure that is a little beyond where we are now. A little beyond means I+1. Okay, and the input hypothesis is summarized by other researchers like this: development from a learner's current stage of interlanguage development, I, to the next stage, I+1, is achieved through the learner comprehending language which contains linguistic items, lexis, lexis means words, syntax, morphology, etc. at I+1. Okay. So we need so these two things: understand or comprehend, and a little bit beyond, or I+1. Comprehensible and I+1. But you may be wondering, how can input at I+1 be comprehensible? Because I+1 stage is one level or one stage higher than the current interlanguage. So input at that level or at that stage, how can it be comprehensible to the learner? So of course, I+1 input may not be comprehensible. So we have to make it comprehensible. But how? Learners can comprehend I+1 input with the help of linguistic and extra-linguistic context. So context, if there is good context, learners can comprehend even I+1 input. So here we have two kinds of context: linguistic and extra-linguistic context. So for example, please read these sentences. John ate sushi and he really likes it. It was very blah blah, I don't know. So if you don't know the word here, can you guess the meaning of this word? Maybe yes. Maybe not precisely, but because John liked sushi, the word here, the adjective here, should be something like good or delicious, or maybe other kinds of meanings that are positive, not negative. So we have here three sentences, and from here to here, it is linguistic context, and based on this linguistic context, we can guess the meaning of this word. And extra-linguistic context is something like this. You watched this in Krashen's video, and we can provide extra-linguistic context by gestures or body language, or by pointing to something. So we can give context to make I+1 input comprehensible. to the learner. But there may be another problem. So new linguistic items contained in comprehensible input may not be learned if they are not noticed by the learner. Okay, so there is a linguistic item in comprehensible input, but if the learners do not notice it, that item will not be learned. So for example, in this sentence, John plays football, we have third person singular s. But usually third person singular s is not salient phonologically and semantically. So it is not salient in sound and in meaning. It doesn't have any meaning. And phonologically, it's weak. So third person singular s is not noticeable. It is there, but it's difficult for the learner to notice. So in that kind of case, even if it is there and it is new to the learner may not learn it because it is not noticeable, because the learner cannot notice it is there. So this researcher, Schmidt, proposed the noticing hypothesis. Learners learn new linguistic items in the input only if they notice them and if they attend to them consciously. Okay? So the new linguistic items contained in comprehensible input, they must be noticed for them to be learned. Okay, so we've been talking about the role or roles of input, but does output play any role in second language acquisition? So output is like speaking and writing. And actually, in Krashen's input hypothesis, output plays no role in second language acquisition. And Krashen assumed a very powerful language acquisition device. Our brains have this device, language acquisition device, and because we have it, we can learn language, both first language and a second language. And according to Krashen, for the language acquisition device to develop language competence in our mind, it only needs comprehensible input, and that's it. So it doesn't need output. But actually, other researchers have opposed to this idea. So there are some, or maybe many, researchers who believe that output is also important. Output is also necessary for second language acquisition. But output is not the topic of this video. It is the topic of another video, so we are not going into this topic in this video. So let's leave it aside. And also we've been talking about I+1 input, but does I-1 input play any role, or does I input? So I means the current stage. I-1 is a little bit before the current stage. Does I-1 input play any role, or does I input play any role? Well, actually, my answer is yes. And language learning is just one kind of learning, and learning is generally it is memory formation. It's the formation of memories. So we already know that memory formation consists of multiple stages, several stages. So for example, let's say in an English class you learned a new word, but next day you forgot it. So in this case, did learning take place or not? So you learned it, but you forgot it. Can you say learning took place? So actually, this story tells us that there are actually two aspects of learning. Or maybe I should say two stages, at least. So the first stage is the initial acquisition of new knowledge. So when I said you learned a new word, we are talking about the initial acquisition of new knowledge. Okay, this is the first stage. And the second stage is consolidation of the acquired knowledge through repeated use or practice. So to consolidate means to cause something to become more solid or strong. Consolidate. So memory formation has at least has these two stages: initial acquisition of new knowledge and consolidation of the acquired knowledge. And actually, I-1 input plays an important role in the consolidation of already acquired knowledge. So it doesn't play any role in the initial acquisition of new knowledge, because I-1 means that you know all the linguistic items in that input. So there is nothing new to newly learn. So I-1 input contains linguistic items that you already know. But you have to make your memory of those linguistic items solid. So if you have a lot of I-1 input, you can consolidate your memory. Okay? So actually, I-1 input plays an important role in the consolidation aspect of memory formation. All right, now now let's talk about teaching. So teachers of English as a foreign language or English as a second language, they provide teacher talk and classroom English. And based on what we've learned in this video, maybe we can say these things. So we can promote the acquisition of second language English by providing students with teacher talk, which involves comprehensible input at I+1 level or I+1 stage. Okay, so comprehensible and I+1. And also, when we try to do so, we should use context, linguistic context and extra linguistic context, to make input comprehensible. And we should also make the new linguistic items in the input noticeable, because learners can learn new linguistic items only if they notice them. And we can do this, we can make them noticeable by repeating them or saying them slowly or saying them loudly. Okay? And also I-1 input plays some role So to consolidate students' memory, we should also use a lot of I-1 input. So if you want to be a teacher of English as a foreign language, please think about these things when you speak English to your students. These are the references. Thanks for listening.